Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome into the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Monday, November 30th, 2015. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm very happy to be joined by our Brandon Castel. BCast, the Buckeyes took down Michigan, of course, 42-13. What an enjoyable win. Some will say too little, too late. What took so long? I say better late than never. Maybe this is the angst of the 90s coming to the surface for me, but that's as good as it gets. I mean, maybe the Wisconsin game last year, 59-0, maybe that's as good as it gets, but the game is never a blowout, it seems like, other than maybe, when Rich Rudd was there in 08. It's always a close game. For Ohio State to do what they did to Michigan, it just made the season for me. Even though they're not going to be national champions probably, that win made the season for me. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. I mean, especially when you look at the overall picture. I mean, it's easy to pull out, where they're at in the season and say, oh, well, they didn't take care of business against Michigan State the week before, and so this game didn't really matter. But first of all, you and I both know it always matters. You and I both know that if we were sitting here this week having this conversation coming off of a loss, it would be a very, very different feeling overall about this 2015 team, about this coaching staff, just about the program in general. So I think you can't go back and tie the two things together necessarily. We've got to take it in context and realize that they struggled against Michigan State. They didn't get the job done. Michigan State has done that to them in the past. A really good football team that came in with a good game plan. A lot of things to be frustrated about, but it was huge to see them respond. When we talked last, I was a little bit worried about which direction they were going to go. There seemed to be some guys coming a little bit unglued after that game against Michigan State, and I didn't know if this team would be the kind of team that responded and came out and really showed the nation what it was capable of and put a strong game like this together, or if it'd be a team that came out and kind of lacked that fire after that kind of loss, knowing the same thing we knew, that they probably weren't going to have a chance to compete for the national championship. So to me, I do look back at some of those Rich Rod games, and to me that was a different kind of blowout. Those Rich Rod teams just were not prepared to even take the field against that Ohio State team. And this is the first year of the Harbaugh era, but I look at what Jim Harbaugh has done this year. I look at the team that they had, the way they've stopped the run for most of the season. This was an evenly matched game. I mean, early in the week, Ohio State was a brief favorite, and then Michigan went to being a slight favorite and back to Ohio State. So I'm not saying that Michigan matched them in talent, but I think that there was, for the first time in a long time, I had serious concerns going in that Ohio State wasn't necessarily a dramatic edge in the coaching department. So I was impressed with everything they did. I think this was a great way to wrap up the season. It's out of their hands now, what's going to happen as far as the college football playoff, but they did what they had to do to at least put themselves back in the conversation.
Urban Meyer made the bold decision to have Ed Warinner go up in the press box along with Tim Beck, and Urban Meyer said he was going to be more involved with play calling, and I'm sure Coach Meyer was. He's always involved, but I think he took it up a notch or two in this game. It was a bold decision, though, to have Ed Warinner go up in the press box. And this is a Michigan defense, BCast. Came in number 2 in the country in total defense, number 4 in the country in rushing defense, and the Buckeyes just steamrolled them. 484 total yards, 371 rushing yards. Just talk about the performance of the offense and the bold decision to have Ed Warinner, because usually when you make a bold decision going into the Michigan game, it reminds me of, okay, we started Stanley Jackson all year, now we're going to go to Joe Germain. Even though I thought Joe Germain was a better quarterback, I thought all along they should have went with Joe Germain. It's like, now you're going to make the change, though? So to make a change in the biggest game of the season, that was a bold move, but man, did it work in spades.
Absolutely, Dave. And the big thing I go to is all season when we've been talking, we've been saying, hey, they've got a ton of talent. We know what Urban Meyer can do. We know what this offense is capable of. Once JT Barrett finds a rhythm, all the stuff with the offensive line and what we expected from them this season versus maybe what we saw from them and some of their struggles early in the year, and then some of their struggles in that Illinois game, and of course against Michigan State. And one thing I always felt like, it felt like there was some kind of disjointed, something just didn't feel to be in rhythm with the offensive play calling. Something, we knew where the talent was. It just didn't seem to have the same kind of rhythm that we saw last year. There seemed to be some inconsistencies. There didn't seem to be kind of that formulated game plan. We go into the game with this plan and we execute this plan. Got into the game, and when things didn't go well, started just to see it didn't all kind of align. I thought moving Ed Warinner up to the booth really started to align things, really brought those guys into being able to be on the same page with Urban Meyer. When you're down on the field, it's a little bit crazy. And Urban has talked about this before with his play caller. In fact, I think you and I were both there when he first came on board with Ohio State and talked about why he didn't love having the offensive coordinator be the offensive line coach, because You want the line coach on the field, but you want the coordinator in the booth. So to me, I mean, think about the fact they switched from Ed Warinner making most of the calls to Tim Beck making most of the calls. Like, that's not something you normally see from a team at this level that's competing for a national championship, that's rated number 1 in the country for most of the season. So obviously something wasn't working well with Tim Beck in the booth and Ed Warinner on the field, and there seemed to be some questions about who was really calling the plays, who had that authority, who was making the game plan. So to me, I think it was a great coaching decision by Urban Meyer to bring some consistency to an area that had really been wildly inconsistent all season. And obviously we saw what happened. I think it really helped. I think Ed Warinner has had a lot of experience with that play calling. You know, those two guys working closely together. I think that worked a lot better than having Warinner on the field and trying to scramble for plays and listening into the headset and everybody trying to figure out, you know, who's on first and what's on second. So to me, I thought it was a great decision. A bold decision this late in the year, but a great decision to do something like that, and really paid off, as you mentioned, when they made that move going into a game of this magnitude.
Yeah, and they had the luxury of having Jim Cordell on the staff as a graduate assistant. He was able to be on the field and kind of be the on-field offensive line coach, and Ed Warinner trusted him to do that. So what a nice luxury you have a guy like Jim Cordell, played all 5 positions for the Buckeyes, was a 4-year starter for the Buckeyes, played in the NFL, played 3 different positions in the NFL. So I think, yeah, he was one of the unsung heroes of that game, with Jim Cordell able to kind of do what Ed Warinner usually does on the field. So good team effort there. And speaking of a team effort, Taylor Decker is one of my favorite guys to talk to. He's so thoughtful. He's not a guy that's going to go off half-cocked. He always thinks about what he's going to say before he says it. So when he said after the game that he really stood up for Ed Warinner, he didn't call out Tim Beck by name, but it was kind of implied. And if it was anybody else, I would have been like, not really the time to do that. Almost reminiscent of what happened with Zeke last week. With Taylor Decker, though, I loved it. I just loved that he spoke from the heart. Again, he didn't call out Tim Beck, but all you had to do was watch that interview to know what he was saying. I'm sure you caught that. What did you make of Taylor Decker's comments?
Well, I mean, I don't think – yeah, no, I agree. I thought it was great because, we've covered Taylor Decker for a while now. You know what kind of kid he is. He's a passionate kid. He's a leader. He's a guy who's very well-spoken and really always has the right thing to say. And I think, those guys took it hard the way that people were criticizing Ed Warinner. I mean, you think about since Ed Warinner got to Ohio State, basically has had nothing but praise thrown at him, for the job that he's done with revamping the offensive line when he first got here, and the job he did with guys like Corey Linsley and Baldwin and Marcus Hall and even Chase Ferris, and just moving pieces that really guys that we didn't know what to make of them before Ed Warinner got there. So to me, I saw a kid that wanted to go to bat for his coach, for the guy that's coached him for the last 4 years, for the guy that he believes in, for the guy that those offensive linemen come together. They pour their blood, sweat, and tears on the field, and really, yes, obviously they do that for Urban Meyer and for the fans and for each other, but when you get into a brotherhood like that and you see how close those guys are up front, they really do it for each other, and they do it for their coach, for Ed Warinner. He's the guy that they go to war for every week. And so, I think Taylor Decker felt like the real war needed to happen, off the field a little bit. I didn't take it necessarily as a shot at Tim Beck. I think just, mainly a defense of a guy that had come under fire a little bit. And I think he wanted people to know, that it wasn't, he wasn't in a position necessarily to be as successful as he could be, up in the booth. And so I liked it. To me, I thought it was, I agreed with what he said, kind of like with the Zeke Elliott thing. I didn't like the way that Zeke handled himself. I thought that, calling out the coaches after the game was obviously not a good look for a player. But I agreed with everything he said, and here again, I agree with what Taylor Decker said. All season we've been talking about the fact that we both know Ed Warinner is a valuable part of the staff and a key part of this offensive game plan. So it was good to see them kind of get that together. We'll see what happens going forward, but I really felt like that move kind of brought some things into alignment. So I'll be interested to see, what happens with Tim Beck and some of that other stuff. But never really been a question for me about Ed Warinner and the value he has on the program. For me, it was a matter of could he be successful doing both roles. I think Taylor Decker wanted to let people know that, the guy's a talented coach and just kind of go to bat for his guy.
Yeah, and for the listeners that might not have seen Taylor Decker's interview or might not have heard about it, here's the Cliff Notes version. He came to the post-game interview room after the Michigan game, and before answering any questions, he was actually asked a question and kind of stopped the reporter politely and said, before I answer any questions, I just want to say something. And it's rarely you see a player make an opening statement, which is what this was. And he just came out and said there's been a lot of criticism of Ed Warinner, and I just wanted to stick up for him. He didn't say stick up for him, but he stuck up for him. And then the quote was, that I really took away, was, you saw what happened when he went up and called the plays. You saw what happened when he was the offensive coordinator. You saw what this offense could be. So I thought that was really cool of Taylor Decker to stand by his coach that has been his offensive line coach for his entire career at Ohio State. Okay, B-Cast, a question that every Buckeye fan is asking now. Can Ohio State still find a way to make the college football playoff? They have two chances. If Bama loses to Florida, they'll probably get in, but Bama's favored by 17 points over this anemic Florida offense. There's also the chance North Carolina could beat Clemson and Ohio State could get in. Clemson's only favored by 5.5 points. However, I could see a scenario where Carolina upsets Clemson and Carolina makes it over Ohio State because they would be the ACC champion, whereas Ohio State would not be the Big Ten champion. There's already going to be a Big Ten team in there. Michigan State or Iowa's definitely getting in. I just don't. I guess anything's possible, B-Cast. Talk me off the ledge a little bit here. I just don't see it happening. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, Dave, I'm with you there. I do want to talk you off the ledge, and I go back to 2007, and I think, that's the ultimate anything can happen scenario. We go into the last week of the season, and you have USC and West Virginia both lose, and somehow Ohio State and LSU end up in the national championship game. So, to me, anything is possible in college football. When you've got 4 spots, think about that. That was the BCS era. There were really only 2 spots, and they needed a lot of things to happen. And they had just lost a couple weeks earlier to Illinois, and everybody thought they were done. They were dead in the water, and somehow they got into that game. And so, obviously, that's not typical. But that's kind of the anything can happen scenario. I look at this and say, this is almost more improbable to me because I really do think that it's going to have to be Florida upsetting Alabama, like you said. I don't know what will happen. I think the committee has proven that they're going to go with the team that they think is the best team to be in the playoffs. So if UNC were to beat Clemson in that game, just because they're ACC champs, to me, doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically going to get the call over Ohio State and that they wouldn't go with 2 Big Ten teams. If the committee really felt like Ohio State, as defending national champs, as the team that showed up and put a whooping on Michigan on Saturday, was one of the 4 best teams in the country and was capable of repeating as national champs, I think it's possible that they would make that decision to put them in and say, we unequivocally think that Ohio State has a better chance to win this whole thing than North Carolina, and we're going to put them in. So, to me, that's not out of the question, but I think the more likely way that Ohio State would get in is if somehow, some way, Florida pulled the upset against Alabama. I don't see it happening. I just don't think Nick Saban's teams lose at this point. They're so much more talented. Maybe if Florida had Will Grier, obviously that would be a different story, but just watching this Florida team, they have not been the same team without him. And Alabama, I think, is going to roll in that game. And I don't think anybody can stop Derrick Henry right now. So I think Alabama's going to roll. But, it's not impossible that the other scenario plays out, and it's North Carolina and Ohio State sitting there, and the committee's going to have a tough decision to make on who they really think the better team is. What's going to hurt Ohio State is they're not going to have a chance to play this week. So we go back to last year, and they were able to play against Wisconsin and really prove a point and prove that they were one of the 4 best teams in the country. And that really swayed the committee's decision. They won't have that chance this year, so the committee's really going to have to lean heavily on what they saw against Michigan, against a UNC team that would be a pretty darn good Clemson team that's been, basically a shoe-in for the playoff for quite some time now. So to me, I think it's a long shot, but crazier things have happened.
Yeah, I think the stars have aligned for Ohio State versus Stanford in the Rose Bowl. We'll see. Now, the Big Ten, the loser of the Big Ten championship game, people have asked, well, wouldn't they make the Rose Bowl? Well, no, the Rose Bowl would have their pick of teams. And I can't imagine, let's say Iowa loses. I can't imagine the Rose Bowl picking Iowa over Ohio State. And maybe you can make the argument the Rose Bowl would pick Michigan State over Ohio State since Michigan State beat Ohio State, but I don't think so. I think the Rose Bowl is going to take Ohio State regardless. They're going to play the Pac-12 champ, likely Stanford, on New Year's Day. So we'll see what happens. That's not a bad consolation prize, Buckeye fans. You kicked the crap out of Michigan. You won the national championship last year. Now you get to go to the Rose Bowl. Not a bad little quote-unquote consolation prize. All right, last topic before I let you go here, B-Cast. Big Ten, what are you doing to me here? Tracy Claeys, I like the guy. He's the interim head coach, they promote him to head coach for the next 2 years. And the excuse was, well, we don't have an athletic director. We have this recruiting class coming in. It's like, okay, whatever. Now Illinois does the same thing with Bill Cubitt, a guy that was mediocre, cast as the head coach at Western Michigan. Nice guy, did okay this year. They're just settling for mediocrity. I don't even know if it's mediocrity, just settling for bad. Daryl Hazel, I love Daryl Hazel. I'm glad he's getting a fourth year. But the cynic in me thinks, why is he getting a fourth year? Your thoughts? I mean, the Big Ten is bringing in so much cash with the Big Ten Network and everything else, and it doesn't make me mad, but it irritates me that so many of these schools are just settling for, at best, mediocrity. Your take?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, Dave. That's what it is. It's settling for mediocrity. It's deciding that, you know what, we can move forward with this coach. We can move forward with this scenario. Expectations are low. People aren't holding us to the fire. If we go out and make a big splash, hire on a big coach, then we've got huge expectations with our fan base, huge expectations with our boosters. We've got to go out and compete with Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan, and Wisconsin. And you know what? We're more content just kind of doing what we're doing and, being Illinois, being Minnesota, being Rutgers, being Maryland. I just think the Big Ten is very mediocre as a conference. I thought that for a while. I never bought into the Big Ten is back type thing. To me, you really need Penn State. Penn State and Michigan have to be the two teams that rise to the top. Obviously Michigan went out and made the big hire with Jim Harbaugh. We'll see what James Franklin can do. I mean, obviously it's been tough sledding for him since he took over for Bill O'Brien. But those are the two programs you really have to have high expectations for, and along with Nebraska. I think that those are the three programs, because if you're counting on Purdue and Minnesota and Illinois and Rutgers and Maryland, I just don't see it. I think sticking with guys who are interim head coaches, I get there's been a lot of turnover. You look at what's going on at Rutgers with the way that they fired their coach and some of the off the field stuff, and the same at Illinois and the way they fired their coach. And I agree with you on Daryl Hazel. He's one of my favorite coaches to cover when he was at Ohio State. Really nice guy. I can see why he's a great position coach. But I haven't seen anything from him as a head coach that makes me think that one more year is gonna unlock a whole new program for them at Purdue. But I think all these conferences all these teams in the conference they're comfortable. They're comfortable taking in the Big Ten Network money and not feeling like they have to perform in order to earn it. So to me, I think the conference has to really take a strong look at itself over the next 5 years. If they want to remain one of the top 2 or 3 conferences in the country, they've got to get better coaches, and they've got to go out and get guys who have done it before, proven winners. I don't understand why they're not going out and getting guys, like Campbell. He goes to Iowa State. How do you not go out and get that guy if you're a Big Ten team and you're looking for a head coach? You're looking for a guy who's an up-and-coming guy who's won at a lower-level program. I think those are the kind of guys they need to get, and yet they continue to settle for, Tracy Clays, and they continue to settle for Bill Cubits, and they continue to settle for these guys as interim coaches. And what does that even mean when you commit 2 years to an interim coach? I look at the contract for Bill Cubit. They can basically buy him out on any time with very little, financial security. It's kind of like, what are you really committing to? The fans aren't stupid. Recruits aren't stupid. So to me, they're just kind of stringing them along, stringing the program along instead of going out and finding the right guy to lead their program into the future. So to me, I'm not a big fan. I think the Big Ten's kind of mediocre right now outside of a couple teams at the top.
The two newest programs in the Big Ten, Maryland and Rutgers, those are the two schools that will be looking for new head coaches. It will be interesting to see what direction they take. Great stuff as always out of Brandon Castel. As usual, you come strong, BCast. I really appreciate your time. Quick programming note, there's no Urban Meyer press conference today. Those are over for the season. I checked in with the SID yesterday at Ohio State. We might get Coach Meyer later this week. He wasn't sure. We might get some players later this week. He wasn't quite sure, so stay tuned there, but we'll let you know when the next Urban Meyer press conference is scheduled. Thanks again to Brandon Castel, and thanks to you for tuning into the show. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day. Take it away, best damn band in the land.